Hey guys, Kurt from Mana Methods here, and today's video we're going to be going over a little bit about RPE. So RPE, what is it? Basically, RPE at its core is a measure of difficulty. Now, for powerlifting, we kind of use that for explanations about how many reps we have left in the tank. So I kind of created this little graphic here up on the screen that you see. I will post it on my Mana Methods team page Instagram. So if you guys wanted to refer to it, it kind of just gives a brief explanation of RPEs, how each rep should feel, kind of what it, and some of them what it should look like as well too. Now, next thing, what it helps with. So RPE helps you to take advantage of performance fluctuations that naturally happen during training blocks, training weeks as well too. That allows you to maximize your progression. So say for example, one day you're coming in, you're feeling really good. You might jump up the weight maybe 5 or 10 pounds from the recommended weight of what you thought you could have been hitting that day. And that just allows you to take advantage of that positive fluctuation for that day. What it also helps with is the complete opposite. So if you come into a training day, you're not feeling too good, your sleep before, outside factors weren't managed as well, sleep was low, stress was high, nutrition, maybe you didn't get to eat a couple meals that day just because you were so busy. You could also bump down the weight, 5, maybe 10 pounds, just so that you don't kind of shoot yourself in the foot and not leave yourself room for progression if you're in that part of the block where you still need to keep on building too. So that's where it kind of applies to that. And then one other thing to also keep in mind is the performance fluctuations I'm talking about for the RPEs. You don't want to make drastic changes. So you don't want to convince yourself coming into a session that you're feeling really good. So you're going to jump up the weight 30, 40 pounds. RPE usually does not work like that. The small performance fluctuations, maybe a couple percent, 5% you might be able to get away with increasing a weight if you're feeling very good that day. So RPE is not an excuse to max out. Make sure you keep that in mind. It also helps with load management and recovery too for long-term sustainability in the actual sport of powerlifting. So if you're doing a program, you want to slowly build from week to week. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot and like empty your gas tank way too early, way too soon. So if you see like a RPE 7 on your program, you definitely don't want to be pushing it past that. It's a way of communication to know a rough range that you should be hitting and how difficult a set should be feeling. Like back to exactly what RPE is, it really is a measure of difficulty at its core. So we want to keep it that way. So that's kind of like what it helps with. Next talking point, how to apply RPE. So typically you would see RPE applied through top sets, back down sets, accessory sets, they make sense. You could also apply it to body weight movements, things that you typically are not going to have a set rep range for every single individual because that's going to vary on like, say for example, pull-ups. You're not going to be able to say like in RPE 8 with 6 to 8 reps. Unless you're doing weighted too. Once you start adding in weights, then you can take that into account, I guess. But if you're doing just regular body weight movements, like push-ups, for example, some people can get 20, some people can get 30, 40. If you're doing it RPE base, you're just counting the reps in reserve. So that's how you apply it to body weight movements that you're not going to be weighting eventually. One other way you could also kind of apply it just in the same concept, just understanding what it is at its core, measure of difficulty, is also time movements. So if you're doing like weighted planks, of course you want to have like a rough time frame that you want to save left in the tank, but that can be communicated through RPE as well. So say for example RPE 10, meaning if you're doing a weighted plank, for example, you're doing an RPE 10, you're going basically till you collapse. I mean, if you want to say RPE 9, you could maybe say that's about 5, maybe 10 seconds left in the tank. RPE 8, then of course that would be more and more time as you start to lower the difficulty, lower the RPE. All right, so next talking point, how to dial it in, how to get it better. So one thing I always recommend that everybody should be doing is recording yourself. So record your sets. As soon as you're done with the set too, you want to think about what that RPE was. So usually the closer you are to finishing a set, the more likely you are to predict a more accurate RPE. So you don't want to sit down 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, try to guess what the RPE was, or like record yourself, not think about it, and then go back the next day, try to look at your recording, and then try to rate your own RPE. Try to rate it as soon as you can, as soon as you're done with the set. But recording yourself, it'll allow you to kind of watch your reps, because the main thing that you want to keep in mind where you want to rate your RPE is the slowest portion of the lift. So the sticking point, pretty much. So most of the time that's coming up right out of the hole for squats, right off the chest for bench, and then depending on the deadlift, it could be off the floor or towards lockout, depending on what stance you pull or what kind of puller you are as well too. So just make sure you keep that in mind, because lockout of the squats, it's usually very, very fast. And if you try to rate RPE based on looking how you felt you finished the set for the squats, that can really dictate like a very, very not closely rated or not accurate RPE rating for what it should be. So you always want to look at the sticking point, the hardest portion of the lift, when you're rating your RPEs. Also, if you're in the gym at the same time with a fellow athlete, fellow powerlifter, if you go to the gym with somebody every single day, ask them to help you rate your set too. So have an RPE in mind, and then ask your friend, ask your buddy, hey, what RPE do you think this was? Because chances are, if they've seen your lifts, they know how you lift, they'll be able to accurately help you rate your RPE as well too. And you also get an outside perspective, not your own, not just only your own thoughts about it. And then one other way to dial it in, you could invest in a velocity-based tracker. It's completely not needed, and they are kind of expensive, so that's that. But what that will allow you to do is it'll allow you just to dial in things just a little bit more, the top few percent, because you'll be able to like build out your own velocity profile. You'll know roughly speeds for an RPE range. So like in RPE 10, you'll know what that speed range is. RPE 9, you should know what that speed range is, just so that it'll give you just the exact measurement of the speed related to the RPE too. So that's the last way to dial it in. And now our last talk point. So just things to remember. So the main thing is, I feel like the most important thing is you don't want to get emotional with RPE. So you don't want to be coming into the day really like pushing yourself. First of all, you don't want to be pushing yourself to RPE 10s every single training session, but you don't want to be coming into the day like you're hyped up, your arousal level is very, very high, and you just keep adding on weight, trying to think like you're trying to hit a RPE 8, but you're really just super, super aroused in your own mind, because that can dictate on how a set moves as well too. So say, for example, on your program, you have like an RPE 7. If you convince yourself a weight can be an RPE 7, a lot of the times you can make it move close to an RPE 7 and get yourself to believe it was an RPE 7 when it really was not. That's really when it comes down to knowing your weight ranges for what the RPE roughly should be, and not straying away too far from that. So that's one way. The second way is, of course, you'll be able to see the RPEs on your program, but also using that as kind of like a mental top end for arousal in your head. So this is kind of something that I take into account personally. So RPE 6s, RPE 7s, maybe. That's when you're going in, you're like, okay, I don't want to get fully mentally hyped for that set, because even though I could make a higher weight probably move at that RPE, it's really not going to be sustainable long term. When you get towards that RPE 8, that's when you can get a little bit more hype for the set. And then when you get to the 9s, and of course like 9.5s, that's when you really want to get super hyped. You can use ammonia if you're the type of lifter that uses ammonia. You don't want to be the type of lifter that uses ammonias for like RPE 7s, 7.5s. just because you could really trick yourself into thinking that higher weights are that RPE, and then when you try to increase that weight from week to week, you'll realize that that RPE and that weight with that RPE was overshot the previous week, and you're leaving yourself no room for progression really. So just be sure to try to take that into account. One other thing is you're not going to get it perfect every time. That's also very important. Learning RPE is a skill, and any skill really takes practice over time to kind of get better and better at. And then even when you think you're getting better, you're going to get stronger, and the weights that you associate it with certain RPEs aren't going to be those same weights. So it's going to take repetition, practice. It's a skill. You're going to be learning it over time. Mindset. So knowing when to push. So when it's towards the end of the block, this kind of goes into what I was saying earlier about how leaving yourself room for progression. So you want to know when to push it and when to not push it. So of course, towards the end of the block, you're at your athletic peak. And if you're feeling good, then a lot of the times it does make sense to kind of push the RPEs, see where the weight can take you from there. But then on the other hand, if you're earlier in the training block, it's supposed to be a chill week. That's when you don't want to be pushing things, maybe one small jump. You don't want to be pushing 2 or 3 jumps above what you thought you were going to be hitting in coming into that day. Also, if you're at the end of the block, I know I mentioned that's a good time to push it. It's also a time when a lot of people might be carrying fatigue, also depending on the goal of your specific training block or training cycle, anything like that. Knowing when to push it too as well means knowing when to not push it. So if your body's sore, you're feeling fatigue, your muscle aches, your joints aches, your knees are sore when you wake up. Of course, you want to give that session a fair shot. Do a nice warm up in the weights without thinking about like today's going to be a down session. Because my very, very like best training sessions sometimes have come with me not feeling so good that day. So just make sure you give each session a fair chance, but also knowing when you're like towards your last warm up or your second to the last warm up and things still aren't moving, then knowing when or where your top end should be for that day, being honest with yourself, and then dialing back the numbers. All right, rating of performance. So RPE, you want to use it as reps left in the tank, reps in reserve. So I've heard of some people using like a mental rating for the RPEs. So meaning mentally the set was a set RPE like 8. When it really looked like a complete grinder, they probably didn't even have a 1 rep left in the tank. So RPE, I'd say for the majority of people, you should stick to using it as reps left in reserve. That's kind of why I made that graphic right up there. So again, if you wanted to refer to it, it's on the Mana Methods Instagram page. So just being honest, keeping it as reps left in reserve, nothing really mental, because we want to really be as accurate as we can and use it really as a measure of difficulty. If we start to get mentality involved into rating RPEs, that's when we can get like one weight moving at one speed, rating it 1 RPE, and then the same weight moving at a faster speed, and then kind of rating that at a very, very different RPE. So just kind of being honest with yourself. And then the last thing that I wanted for you guys to keep in mind, to remember for RPE, is you really need to know yourself too. So knowing, like, say for squats, bench, or deadlift, how your warm-ups feel. Like if, say for example, squats, of course, empty bar, it's not going to feel very, very good for everyone, just because you really don't have that counterbalance. So just knowing how the weight should feel, especially as you're going up, you're climbing up towards your first set, your second set, your third set, as you're warming up. When you hit that last warm up, knowing yourself. Sometimes people's last warm ups, they move very, very fast, and then they're able to get a better RPE rating or a better weight for the RPE rating they should be hitting for that day. Versus other people's, their last warm ups never feel good, or their second to the last warm up never feels good. And then at that point, they take that as a warm up, they use that as their knowledge. They know that their second to the last warm up or their last warm up does not feel as good all the time. So that's something that you have in your head. You can take that into account and make the appropriate jumps for the target RPE that you're hitting that day. So yeah, just really being honest with yourself, knowing yourself, realizing that RPE, what it is at its core, a measure of difficulty. Got the little chart here. I think that was everything that I wanted to talk about RPE. Yeah, that's it, guys. Take care. Have a good day. Stay safe out there.